Alright, so what we have today is a little kind of demo tutorial on a project that Elaine showed the other day. So she had this laying on the table in front of her, and she was talking about using the bias strip tape makers to assemble your quilt as you go projects. And we've actually had a lot of people asking us for the pattern for this exact project. There is no pattern because I just kind of made it up. But I'll walk through what I did because it's actually fairly simple. This was from a class that we were doing on the 4-patch Kaleidoscope quilts. Some people call it, stack and whack, one block wonder, whatever name you want to call it. We like to use 4 layers and cut out squares to go with them. So this was, okay. So these were my little packs that I had when I did the class. So I was cutting 4-inch squares, and these are my 4 layers. And when you just cut them, when you just sew them together in your standard Kaleidoscope block, this was the size I got. I had a whole bunch of them left over, my little 4-inch packets. So I decided to play around with them. So the first thing I did is I decided what am I going to get if I cut this pack in half once. Okay. So I ended up with 2 packets, each one having 4 squares. So when I sewed them together, and for these you're always going to put this point to your center, so you end up with 2 blocks that are kind of medium size. So I had my large one and I have my 2 medium ones. And then I thought, well, what happens if I cut them in half twice diagonally?
There she goes thinking again.
Yeah, it's a fault. So that gave me 4 little packets, each one having 4 repeats. So when you sew those together, and this time this corner is always going to be your center, so then you end up with 4 little blocks like that. So you can cut all of your starting squares the same size, and then you're just cutting them once in half or twice in half diagonally to get these different size and create the kaleidoscopes. So once I had done that, if anybody who knows me knows I love to set everything on point. I just think it makes things just different, a different angle, and it makes your blocks bigger automatically. So I'm going to move this a minute. So then what I did was I was taking my 3 different sizes and I was setting them on point. So right there. So that's just adding in this triangle corner to your square blocks. So in today's daily dose, like the second circle, we're going to be putting up this little chart that gives you all the different size squares to cut for setting a block on point. Okay, some of you who are involved with the 2020 quilt, you already have this, but a lot of you watching our daily dose are not doing that project. So you're going to be able to print this off today. So in order to set things on point, let me bring this right back. Just going to grab one of each. So I had my 3 different blocks. So this one is squared up to 7.5 inches. So I'm going to look at my chart. I'm going to find my 7.5 inch unfinished block size. And I want to cut corner triangles. So I need to cut my squares at 6.25 inches. And I'm going to need 2 squares for each block that I want to set on point. So here are my 2 6.25 inch squares. Okay. And then this one squared up to 5 inches. So for that one, and my chart is all in half sizes, so I would just look at my 5.5. It's going to be a little bigger, but that's okay. I had to cut 2 5-inch squares, so that's these. And then for my little one that's squared up to 3 inches, I had to cut 2 3¼ inch squares. So you just look at the size on your chart for whatever size you're trying to set on point. And of course she walked away.
And while that phone is ringing for 1 second, I'm having a little trouble with my camera here getting, hang on just 1 second, I'm getting some real bright glare. That's better.
All right, so I'm just going to be working with this 5-inch square. So what I need to do is I need to take my 2 squares that I cut according to my chart, and I need to cut them in half 1 time diagonally. Okay. So that's going to give me my 4 triangles. And then I'm just going to add them around my square. So I'm going to put 2 on opposite sides. I'll sew those on, iron them towards the triangle, and then I'll add my other 2 sides on. And again, so now once I set this block straight, my center square will be on point. All right. So I have some other pieces here that I've prepped at home last night. We did this with a Kaleidoscope kit, but there's no reason that you can't do it with just a solid piece of fabric. All right. So last night I cut out my large squares. I cut out my medium squares. And I cut out my small squares. And I've set all 3 of them on point. Now you can see obviously this one is smaller than this, and this one is even smaller yet. So the next thing I needed to do was to get these to be the same size. Okay. So what I do when I'm doing that is I set it and I line up my points of my diamonds. And then I'm just going to measure what the difference is. So for this one, it's just about 2 inches. And I'm going to take that measurement and I'm going to add another inch to it. So that gives me my 1/2 inch seam allowance plus about a 1/2 inch extra in my length. So when I do that, I'm going to cut those 3-inch pieces. Okay, so here's my seam, if you can see that. My block ended right here. And now when I go to add these on, I can make sure that these points are going to line up perfectly. If I try to cut this to size first, all of a sudden I'm lining up my edge and now my points aren't lined up. So if I pin at my points and sew across there, then I can come back and trim this off straight to make sure everything's going to be the same size. And then I need to move on to my smaller ones. Again, I'm going to measure, line it up with my point. Let's fold this because this would have been cut off. This would have been trimmed off to the same size as my large square. So for this one, I'm at just over 3 inches. So I'm going to cut my strip at about 4 1/4 or 4 1/2 and add those on. Which is going to give me, again, this is where my block ends. And then I have my little bit longer piece. I'm going to line it up, sew it across here, and then trim it off. So it's just a way to take any block, whether it's a piece block or just a solid square, set it on point, and you can have multiple sizes, doesn't matter. You could start with a 12-inch and then cut a 10 and an 8 and a 7 and a 6 and a 5. Really doesn't matter how much you are, you just need to set them on point and then measure and fill in the open space. All right, so I hope that was something that is something new for you, something that you learned today.